Yesterday, Peter Thiel at an event was talking a lot about central banks and Bitcoin, and his thoughts were really interesting. He basically railed against the central banks and the US government and said that he had underinvested in Bitcoin. Now, this is fascinating because Peter, for a long time, has had critical thoughts about some of the structural issues, some of the power arrangements in the government and those central banks. But now it looks like a lot of the undisciplined monetary and fiscal policy that we've experienced over the last 18 months in the short term and longer term over the last couple of decades is catching up. And so Peter at this event had a couple of key quotes to talk through. The first quote, he said, "You're supposed to just buy Bitcoin. I feel like I've been underinvested in it." Specifically, he was talking about the idea that if you wanted to get exposure to the industry, buying Bitcoin, the blue chip, the largest asset, was really going to be that possible entrance point. And he felt like he had underinvested in it. Second quote that he had here was when he talked about the US Federal Reserve. And he said, "But surely the fact that Bitcoin is at $60,000 is an extremely hopeful sign. It's the canary in the coal mine. It's the most honest market we have in the country. And it's telling us that this decrepit regime is just about to blow up." Pretty dark stuff here coming from Peter. And then lastly, he said, quote, "The secret was already known by everybody. I think the answers are still to go long. Maybe it's still is enough of a secret." And this specifically is referring to the fact that Peter is famous for investing when he says that he understands a secret that maybe others don't. And so when we start to actually look at this, what we have is somebody who's well respected in the investing world, in the technology world, somebody who's not afraid to have contrarian thoughts or opinions, saying, look, I think that there is a legacy world. That legacy world has very specific structural issues, and we're starting to see some kind of decay in the trust of that organization. But at the same time, we have this asset, a decentralized digital asset, fully transparent with a programmatic monetary policy that can't be censored. That is rising in popularity. And you see that rise in popularity measured directly by the price. You have a fixed supply asset. As the US dollar exchange price goes up, that means more and more people are demanding access to hold and own that asset. And so if we have these two separate systems, Peter is basically saying as one is able to kind of fade away or become less important, less trusted, the other will rise in importance. And so ultimately the question is, in his mind, is how much of a secret is the new system still? Is it still something where there's opportunity to actually allocate a portion of your portfolio? I tend to think that there probably is a pretty big opportunity. So when we see somebody like this, somebody who's a co-founder of multiple investment firms, somebody who's a co-founder of Palantir and PayPal, also the first investor in Facebook, looking at a new piece of technology, again, the strongest computer network in the world, valued at about $1.25 trillion, and saying that there's still an opportunity here, I think that more and more people will start to pay attention. There's a lot of folks who look at the Wall Street and the financial world and say, oh, if Steve Cohen and Stanley Druckenmiller and Paul Tudor Jones and others like them are all starting to allocate, that gives me career risk cover. I don't have to worry about it because the best hedge fund managers are starting to invest there. The same thing is true in the technology world. If Peter Thiel all of a sudden is starting to invest in an asset and is coming out and talking about it in a positive light, there's a lot of people who say, well, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And they'll start to allocate to the asset as well. They'll start to hold it in their funds or personally. And so ultimately, I think this is a net positive for the industry. I think it's a net positive for the asset itself. But it's very interesting to see, especially that quote where he says that he believes that this is telling us that the decrepit regime is about to blow up. Now, Peter in the past has been very critical of other administrations. He's also been very critical of other types of regime changes. And sometimes those things have actually come to fruition. Other times they haven't. Sometimes even he's been correct about what he thought was going to happen, but he wasn't actually positioned to benefit financially as much as he wanted. And so to see him again saying, hey, there is this message that maybe we are headed to a place that we don't want to go, but I'm underinvested to benefit from it, might be a canary in the coal mine that a lot of people start to pay attention to.